Hello, hello. Hello, folks. How is it going? Oops. Ooh, 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 ooh. That screen. There we go. Uh, Welcome to Joystick Jams. I'm Timothy Adon.
Welcome back, everybody. It's glad to see you here. My name's Adam. Welcome back to Joystick Jams. And today we're going to be talking, since we have both of the composers here today, we're going to be talking pretty much entirely about music.
Yeah, and our focus today is going to be on chiptune music.
Yeah, so chiptune music is uh, sort of almost a nebulous term for a lot of people. You know, it kind of sounds retro wave, um, but a lot of people don't really understand how it's made, and it's a really important part of even modern video game music culture. You have games like Shovel Knight and Terraria, and those that are using chiptune for their soundtracks. So diving into it today is going to be an exciting adventure. Checking all these techniques and things that we have going on um, out
Absolutely.
and kind of diving into what makes a song chiptune.
And it's important to note that on top of being used for video games, there are also artists out there that go out and do touring concerts of chiptune music. And a lot of the ideas behind chiptune music is very easily utilized. Even if you're not necessarily making a chiptune piece, it's very easily utilized uh, for other styles of music.
Yeah, I think one of the things that attracts me to chiptune music is that it requires you to be very intentional about everything that you do because there are so many limitations, especially if you're going like pure chiptune, if you're working with all of the restrictions of the chip that you're emulating. It really teaches you to be very efficient with the notes that you put in, the harmonies that you put in, and such. And it's a really valuable experience, even if that's not the kind of music you want to make, to go in there and kind of examine some of those songs to see how they put those together.
Yeah, and a lot of the older video game music has a very particular character, and there are some amazing examples of music that still holds up while utilizing the limitations of the systems at the time. So it's a very good study in uh, music composition within very very strict limitations.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we kick things off and just talk a little bit about what makes a song chiptune? And then we can go from there because there's a
Absolutely.
lot of elements here. There's like, you know, we have to dive at least a little bit into synthesis and how that works, and talk about how sound design works when you have a limited number of parameters to work with.
Yeah, and I know that you've spent a little bit more time on this topic than I have. I've mostly been looking into it recently um, because of your interest, but you've been working a lot with the Nintendo Entertainment System, as I recall.
Yeah, so well, if you talk about the origins of chiptune, the name chiptune really means, and the way it originated is it's music generated with a chip that was in the old video game console systems. Like the Game Boy is a really popular one, the NES is a really popular one, and the 2A03 Rico chip that's in the NES is the one that I'm working with. There's a program called SynthNest. We'll showcase that later in the stream, that allows me to tap into my NES and use that chip to create the music. And so what it's almost a bridge between modern like electronic synthesis and, or rather a bridge between analog synthesis and modern digital synthesis. It's a weird gray in between area because it's really digital synthesis. You're using software to talk to this computer chip to tell it what to do, but it's not computing the way that a computer chip would in a DAW. It's actually running voltages up and down like an analog synthesizer would. So, when talking about chiptune, if you're going to try and be as authentic as possible, you have to recognize that those old chips came from the 1980s. They were just as limited as any other computing piece of hardware that you might have. So that's kind of where the sound comes from. And like you said, a lot of the music from back then really holds up. And to deep dive into that, and really kind of recreate some of those soundtracks is how you learn to get that authentic sound out of your chiptune compositions. And then you can apply that in your DAW probably much faster than you can working with original hardware.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and something to note for those that might be a little bit too young to know exactly what we're talking about. Video games nowadays just include whole wave files for the music of whatever it is that they want the music to be. It is just a wave file that is included in the game file and, takes up your hard drive space. But when it comes to things like the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Game Boy, going up through probably the GameCube is probably where it might
all the
have...
way up through the end. Yeah, all the way up through the N64 is when Nintendo cut it off. The PlayStation had soundtracks burned to the CD because it had more storage space than the N64.
Yeah.
But Nintendo was still using, I think at that point they were using MIDI within the N64.
And
But
so music in those older systems could not be burned into the cartridges like they are in modern games. And so instead it was just we're sending instructions to the chip that then just plays square waves is a lot of what they were doing.
Yeah, so it's interesting because high quality audio files in modern video games, they take up a lot of space, and you don't think that a few megabytes or whatever is a lot of space, but you've got to realize that these old systems only had like maybe a couple of kilobytes worth of data that they could work with, and that had to be spread across all the assets, art, music, gameplay, all of the coding that had to fit within a couple of kilobytes worth of data. And so instead of trying to record a sound audio file to this and using up that entire couple of kilobytes for maybe, I don't know, 30 seconds worth of music, and then having no game to show for it, they instead sent a series of numerical instructions to this chip, which controlled voltages just like an analog synthesizer would, and sent sounds that were synthesized to your TV, and that's how they got music into old video games. Because prior to the NES, the Atari had only one channel, and so if you were having sound effects play, you didn't have music. And so that's why, like, you go into Pac-Man and it would have the little ditty beforehand, but then when you're actually playing the game, there's no song.
Yep.
But the NES and the Ricoh chip bumped that up to 5 channels. And one of them they didn't use too terribly much. The Famicom in Japan actually had expansion chips that they could put into the cartridges and they could get additional channels, but that didn't come to the North American version.
Yeah, and I know in the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, there were technically 5 channels, but only 4 of them were ever used. Which is why in the Game Boy Advance, they actually removed that 5th channel because nobody was using it.
Right.
But still, like four or five channels, however, is extremely limiting.
Yeah, absolutely. And why don't we show everybody what that actually kind of looks like? You want to do that?
Sure, sure.
All right.
Or are we looking at the synth nest, or are we looking?
Yeah, I'll pop it up on my screen real fast,
Okay.
and I'll just kind of show some of the parameters that has. Um, so this is the program that I use to communicate with the NES. It's called SynthNest. It's free, but the cartridge that has the SD card and all of that stuff that goes into the NES, that is not free. It's a couple $100s. So what you can see here is that we actually have two channels up here. We have some modulation sources, which kind of gets into synthesis, but basically these are ways of controlling the sound, ways of shaping the sound. And then we have a triangle and a noise channel here. There's actually a fifth channel, and it's a little hard to explain. They could actually record really super low quality sound files to this fifth channel, and a lot of times it was used, like in Super Mario Brothers 3, it was used for some of the drums in that, and so they would have one or two super short little drum files added to that fifth channel, and then they could free up another channel for sound effects or something along those lines. But this is all you get. A real simple envelope, no filters, a little bit of modulation that you can apply to either pitch or volume, and that's about it. But the brilliant thing about the NES and the Game Boy and some of those old systems is that they used pulse waves. And without getting too technical into how that works, pulse waves change their timbre, the way they sound, depending on the width of the wave. So they could actually have two channels, but they could have a variety of different sounding instruments with just those two pulse wave channels, just by altering that one parameter. And so that's how in some of those old tunes you would end up hearing what sounded like a variety of instruments. It's really just the two instruments plus the triangle wave, which was usually used for like low end drums and bass. It was really the two pulse wave channels, and then they had to, within those four channels, they also had to make room for the sound effects because that had to play on one of those four channels.
Yep.
So
yeah, and the other channels, at least on the Game Boy, I don't know about the NES necessarily, but on the Game Boy, the other two channels were, there was a custom waveform that you could load in from the game itself, and then the fourth channel was a noise wave, which would be used for a lot of percussive elements.
Percussive and some sound effects and things like that.
Yep.
My compositions, I've used it a lot for percussion. The noise channel on the NES is kind of nice because it has different, I guess, audio characteristics of different noise features depending on which note you play. So you can actually get a variety of different drums on the single channel, which is convenient as well. So
yeah,
but
there's something about that on the Game Boy too. I just didn't understand it.
All of this was hand coded by the composers. They had to put in all of these parameters by hand on it, like in numbers, almost like in an Excel spreadsheet.
Kind of like coding, as opposed to like how DAWs work, where you can just like plug and play your notes on a screen. It was very much like computer coding.
Yeah, they hadn't adopted MIDI protocol at that point in time.
Do we? What's next? What's next on this list?
Whatever you want, man. I can put SynthNest back up there. I can kind of go over some of the racks, or we can go over some of the ways that we've gotten authentic sounding sounds out of our DAWs if you'd like,
Sure.
and kind of
Let's do synth ness for a little bit more synth ness, and progress through the timeline, as it were.
sure. All right, so and load that back up. I th- I have a track that I would really like to share,
Oh yeah.
except that if I change it in my DAW, I think I'm going to lose audio.
Oh no. Okay.
But no,
Well,
I can do that right now. We might
we
have to
can do
test
that
that
towards
another
the
time.
end then, and that'll be our big send off if everything breaks.
Yeah, there we go. All right, so nope, that's the wrong one.
For
That's
anybody
off.
watching this now or in the future, routing audio to or from digital audio workstations to stream and Discord, absolute nightmare.
Yeah, it's really rough. It can be kind of a challenge to get your signal flow correct, so you're not doubling signals and stuff like that. All right,
Yep.
so let's get back into Synthness here. All right, so this is the sort of keyboard that comes with it. You can actually play this using your DAW. It just takes a little bit of effort. And if we have time or on another stream, I'll show how to set that up. I've also done some tutorials on it on TikTok on Vertical Refresh Audio's TikTok channel. So if you do have the original hardware and this is something you want to play with, you can go on there and you can kind of see how I managed to get Ableton, which is the DAW that I use, to talk to SynthNess and send information. But for right now, what we have right now is, we have our triangle and pulse and all of those. And if we play a note, you get a pulse wave, right? That's what a pulse wave sounds like with full pulse width. And if you notice, when I change this parameter here, we really only get 4 different pulse widths. We can't cycle through them in a granular way like we would in a DAW. And that's one of the ways that one of the little features that you have to pay attention to when you're trying to get an authentic sound. I think that the pulse width options are like a 0%, a 25%, a 50%, and a 75% or something real basic like that. But each one sounds different, right? Wrong one. That one almost sounds like a triangle wave. And so, and then you have your typical ADSR envelope, which is the way that the sound comes in. And then you can modulate some things like pitch depth. I have to remember how to do this because I have not used this a whole lot. It's a crazy sound out of it, right? And you can apply these other envelopes here, like these ADSR envelopes here, to something like how quickly your modulation sources come in and stuff like that. For SynthNess, the big challenge specifically with this software is that, and what I learned was you can set up individual tracks for these because each one of these channels is on a different MIDI channel. So you can set up individual tracks for channel 1, 2, 3, and 4. The problem is that all the modulation sources that you might want to try to automate in your DAW are all universal, and so they're all going to modulate each other all at the same time, and so that doesn't really work. You have to kind of record things individually. But this is what you would get with a Ricoh 2A03 chip in an NES is these three channels, and the pulse waves sound exactly the same. We'll go to pulse 2. It sounds exactly like a pulse wave. Triangle wave sounds a little bit more like a sine wave. It's not quite. There are some added harmonics there. And the interesting thing about the triangle wave is because it's a super low fidelity signal, it's not actually a true triangle wave. It's actually just 16. It only has 16 steps to the triangle wave, whereas we would use like a 32-bit depth for modern synthesis, which sounds different. Uh, um, this adds a whole bunch of added harmonics to it, and it's one of the things that makes the unique sound of the NES is the triangle wave. Right? And then noise channel, like I said, has different versions of the noise that you can go in and modulate. And if I can get into that track at the end of the show, then I will show you how you can sort of checkerboard notes in order to get drums added using the triangle wave and still have bass notes in there and stuff like that. You have to like modulate almost every single note as you go. And that's the way they did it. I'd actually pull up. I don't know if I have it installed right now. You can actually get another program called Fama Tracker, which does more or less the same thing, but it is where you go in and you code your song in the way they would have with the original hardware. So if you are a super nerd like me and are into that sort of thing, then you can actually go in and explore that if you want to. And Fama Tracker is a free piece of software as well. So that's my long-winded explanation of SynthNES.
That's awesome. It's actually very cool seeing this because I've heard you talk about it a lot, but I have not actually gotten to see this yet. So that is very cool. So now that we're in this day and age, there are plugins that you can use for emulating those sounds, and that's all cool and well and neat. But if you're somebody like me, you like using the software that you already have that exists. And the thing about a lot of these sound waves is that they are basic shapes. As Adam mentioned, some of those shapes are slightly different, like work slightly different back then because of certain limitations or design elements, like the triangle wave. But we can still work to emulate those sounds on more modern plugins. And with the knowledge of how the limitations worked on some of that hardware, we can then recreate and then push the envelope a little bit on the sound of chiptune music. And I think
sure.
a fairly good example of this is the music from FTL, where it's very, very retro sounding, but it's not at all retro because it uses things that would not have existed on the hardware at the time.
Sure.
So I'm going to share my screen and also change. All right, so go to that screen on OBS and then share my screen. And I would like to share the whole screen. Otherwise, you will never be able to see my plugins. There we go. Okay. There we go. All right. So I use Reaper for all of my music needs. And I have something written up here, but I'm going to ignore that for now, so that we can put in and just take a look at a blank Serum preset. Once this loads, there we go. It is taking a moment. And just to be clear, can you see Serum loaded?
I see it. Yep, you're good.
Okay, just making sure. All right, so I use Serum for my as my default synthesizer. I absolutely love it. It has a lot of ways that you can change how the sound functions. And it starts off with this saw wave. We're gonna get rid of that because we don't care. We are going to open. We're gonna just go to basic shapes and go to a square wave. So the waves that you're going to be looking for when you are trying to recreate a more retro sound, pulse waves. The Game Boy itself had 2 pulse wave channels. A wave of your choice, which is actually a very nice addition to being able to modernize the sound, and then a noise. So I'm going to start, because we have 2 pulse waves, I'm going to start with a square wave. And we are going to very quickly delete all of these excess things so that we can have, and this already has 3 setups for our, oops, wrong one. There we go. 3 possibilities for pulse waves. And if we, oh, I forgot to plug in my keyboard, but that's okay. We can just use this.
You're a little loud there, boss. You
a little loud? Okay, yeah. These square wave is a bit loud. We're going to turn that down. How's that?
A little lower, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Better.
Okay. So right there, like that is a 50%. And we're actually going to turn off the randomizer. Serum by default randomizes the start of the waveform, but when you're looking at older hardware, the waveforms will always start at the beginning. So it already sounds really good. Now, for emulating the hardware, we only have access to an envelope and the ability to modulate pitch or panning. So we can go ahead and...
I think it's important to note that you don't get a filter with this.
Yeah, it's very important to note that you don't get a filter. And a filter is like the thing that you use for characterizing a sound.
Right, modern synthesis is based almost entirely around the filter, and you don't get one.
So now we just do this. A little upset I didn't plug in my keyboard, but it would take a lot of effort to get it plugged in now. And even just with that, just a little bit of attack and a very steep decay, it's already just a very pleasant little square wave sound. And that is keeping within the limitations of the hardware of the time. Now, if you wanted to get a little bit crazy with this, I'm going to go ahead and unmute this one. I believe this is the other square wave that I was using. Everything is moving so slowly.
Streaming problems.
Yep. Oh, that is a saw wave that I was using there.
One of the techniques that I do while you're pulling this up,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, is I try to go in and I try to think of a sound like say a violin or a trumpet or just any kind of analog type instrument, any kind of real world instrument. And then I try to take those basic waveforms and I try to get as close to that as I can, because that's kind of how they composed is they would, and it shows more when you get into like the Super Nintendo era. Um, but it gives you a variety of different timbres using just an envelope and a little bit of like pitcher or volume automation and using the shape of the pulse wave.
Definitely. And I feel like this right here is going to be a fairly decent example. Now, on this, all I did was I included a filter, which again does not exist on that early hardware. But it really helps. Actually, you know what? We're going to turn the filter off for now. And we're also going to turn off the reverb. So this is what I created as a sort of toms sound. And this is, again, just using a square wave, but very, very strict attack and decay. And that sounds, I mean, I feel like that sounds authentic. It's been a little while since I've listened to true chiptune.
That sounds pretty good.
And then, going a little bit off the cuff, adding a filter and a reverb. And we are able to have a very retro sound, but with some of the luxuries of the contemporary era.
Absolutely. It's all about like how authentic you want to get with it. And I think some really great music is being written right now that blends the two.
Absolutely. I think a good example, and I'd have to actually pull up an example, and I'm not going to do that right now. Is the music from? Actually, you played this. You played Sea of Stars.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. It's a great game. But I am not always one to 100% a game.
Yeah, me
Um,
either.
but I did that one. I went through and I even got there's an ending beyond the ending, and then there's extra content beyond that. And I went through and got the extra Easter egg beyond that because how good the game was. So
That's very
I recommend
awesome.
it to anyone. And the music is absolutely stunning.
The music is really good. Now, what do you remember of the music? It's been a little while since I played the game, and I have the memory of a goldfish.
Well, it's been a little while since I played the game because I finished it a while ago, but I it was, if I had to place the era, I would place it between the Super Nintendo and the PlayStation 1 era. And the PlayStation 1 had some really great synthesized RPG music. Um, uh, there were some great RPGs on the PlayStation 1, and it felt um, kind of from that era, but um, I think that they did use, if I'm recalling correctly, I think that they did use some extra oomph behind their synthesis when they were working on that because and they did that for the entire game. Like the entire vision of the game was uh was sort of retro with a modern touch. The lighting effects, were
Yeah.
absolutely stunning in that game, and not something that you would have even gotten in the PlayStation 1 era because it was dynamic lighting in a 2D game.
In a
Who's ever
2D
heard of that?
pixel art game.
Right. Who's ever heard of that?
We might end up getting a wee bit. The channel might get a little bit flagged. At the very least, the VOD is going to be silent in these parts, so we'll have to. Nope. C of. So we might have to, in the VOD video, put it in ourselves, or at least put in a link. But I'm gonna go ahead and put on. Oh, and you're not going to hear this, which is very unfortunate. Sea of Stars.
Tell me when it's done.
Yeah.
I could actually turn it on from the stream.
It's true. Looking up the Sea of Stars OST. Because I feel like this would be a very good topic of conversation. This really quick, and then we're gonna go here.
If you're ever curious about any of the older stuff, like the NES era stuff, go check the music from Mega Man. The music from obviously Final Fantasy. Nobuo Uematsu, is a world-renowned composer. The stuff from the Castlevania series, and you can kind of, if you're paying attention, you can hear when certain instruments cut out to play a different instrument. Especially like in the drums, if you check out the Mega Man stuff, they have a really distinct tom sound that they used in the Mega Man games that wasn't used in a lot of the other games, and you can hear that as it cuts out from the bass to play the tom.
And I feel like if you ever play the some of the original Pokemon games, whenever a battle starts, you get the opening battle music, and then when a Pokeball is thrown and the Pokemon comes out, everything else cuts out so that the Pokemon can make its sound, and then the music comes back in.
Right.
Alright. Would you like me to link this to you so that you can listen along there, Adam?
I'll listen on the stream.
Okay. Cool. Oh, I have it muted. There we go.
Okay. My stream's like 3 minutes behind.
Yeah, it seemed to have gotten a little delayed. I mean, as it is, I'm having issues even just listening to this.
Well, check it out.
My computer, yeah, check it out. It's really good. But from that little bit that I can listen to, it's very, very contemporary. And it's... actually listening to that bit, I feel like it's a little bit more modern than I was giving it credit for initially. It's got lots the definition between the different kinds of instruments is very profound. Whereas in original hardware, while you can get a lot of character out of the limitations that exist, probably not the you wouldn't get the amount of variance that was in even just that first track.
No, probably not. And again, if you include a sound effect, even if that sound effect only takes one channel, you're down to three channels for your music. So, but if you want a more modern example of like chiptune, like I said, the Shovel Knight soundtrack is really good, and uh, fits the pixel art style, the sort of retro platformer style of the game. So check that one out too. Um, and maybe one day, if I'm lucky, I'll see if there's a way to use a Super Nintendo and do the same thing, because I would love to be able to use a Super Nintendo and emulate on that, because uh, the music that was on the Super Nintendo, Chrono Trigger and Final, I mean, it's iconic.
Speaking of, the emulation of this old hardware for the sake of music or just playing games is very much alive and well. And before, like I think it was last week or the week before, um, Adam and I were drooling over something called the Analog Pocket, which is a modern rendition of the Game Boy, and it is capable of playing the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, and it has attachments for doing other systems and the like, and comes with the ability to use it as a synthesizer for the original Game Boy sounds. And so people are super into emulating and recreating these games and sounds, and it's quite wonderful seeing the like.
Yeah, video games are still really in their infancy. They've come a long way, obviously, since the 2600 days, but you go play Pong versus playing something modern, and you're like, oh my gosh, this looks lifelike. But the reality is that they're, you know, 50 years old, 60 years old, if you want to start getting into the like really golden age type arcade stuff. But as far as an art form is concerned, it's still pretty young, and so kind of keeping that history alive in the music is, I feel, kind of important and special. It's fun to be able to kind of go back to that and experience it, especially when you're playing some big Bethesda game and it's got this huge like 180-piece orchestra playing some massive, you know, super sweeping exotic music. Um, you know, there's a lot to be said in game design for abstraction,
Yep.
and sometimes less is more. And some of those giant sweeping orchestral scores wouldn't fit in every single game. So being able to have the ability to use some of these techniques to create a more retro sound is a desirable, I feel like, thing for a musician to be able to do. And you can do all kinds of stuff on it too. You can make your sound effects on there. That's how they used to do it back then as well. So
Absolutely. All right. Well, do you
well,
want to try to get your track going?
I will do my best. I might have to add an audio track for my voice. I think that that's what's going to go wrong. And
Well,
again,
let's
it might
find
not.
out.
Everything is such a giant tangled spaghetti mess of audio routing right now that I'm not sure what's going to happen. Um, and yeah, this is the one. And it might look like a mess right now, actually. Can you see that? Can you hear me okay still?
I can still hear you.
Nice. Okay, so this is my horrible tangled mess of a project that I put together when I was still trying to learn how to use SynthMass. And I kind of overcomplicated things, but you can see that I have.
You're not sharing your screen.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, you're fine. There we go. All right, horrible tangled mess, right? So, but you can see that I have groups for each of my channels: pulse, triangle, noise. And if you get into them, what you have, if I bring these back in and zoom in, is you have my MIDI data for each of these channels. And the reason I have them broke down into these separate sections, I have A and B sections broken out, is because each of these sections, these channels are playing a different instrument. Okay. So what this really looks like when it's playing is something, I don't know, it's kind of checkerboarded. And then each of these will be making a different noise for the A section, and then the B section, and then the A section, and the B section. Okay. You come down here, and these are where I recorded the actual sound files back from the NES. So this is the actual audio information from the NES coming back into the DAW. And the one thing that I want to do here before anything else happens is I want to not blow your eardrums out.
Yes, please.
So we're going to bring this kind of way down, and then you can tell me if I need to turn it up, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
And let me make sure that stuff that's muted and stuff that's not muted. All right. If it's too loud, let me know. If it's not loud enough, let me know. Device specifically to help you.
Does it's not too loud?
Does it sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is original hardware composing. Hopefully, I don't have any additional tracks in there. I was recording voiceovers for some of this stuff too. Hey everybody, yep, does somewhere. Where is it? Now we get to the game. Where's the track that I don't want playing? Pulse. This one. There we go. Let's try that again. Here. Never play it the same time. They are.
Can you actually turn it up just a wee bit? It's unfortunate because it seems like there's the audio from that is having trouble coming through all the way. Oh, there it is.
Now I have to, in the interest of full disclosure, I have to admit that I cheated a little bit at your advice, because originally the way I had this written was that the toms didn't play at the same time as the bass, and it sounded wrong. It sounded like the bass was playing out of time.
Yep.
And so I actually went in and I filled out the bass, and I actually had them playing at the same time, which is not the way that's supposed to be. But because I'm recording the tracks individually, I get a little bit of a pass on that. So.
Yeah, and honestly, like, again, perfect emulation is not necessarily the goal, It certainly can be, but I feel like the track just in general sounded much better with that one little nudge of modern usage.
Yeah, for sure. And sorry you cut out, so I hope I'm not repeating anything on the stream here, but um, it's art. It doesn't have to be perfect, you know. Make it sound good.
Yeah.
Before you do anything else, and if you want it to sound authentic, here are the limitations. This is what they had to work with at the time. The closer you can get to that, the more it's going to sound like an NES or a Game Boy. But if it doesn't sound right, budget.
Yeah. Much like any art, knowing the rules just means that you're more informed when you start breaking them.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you want to touch on, boss?
Nothing that I can think of, at least not today, not in the amount of time that we have left. What about you? Anything else that you want to mention? Any shout outs?
Just play with this. Even if this is not what you're going to be working in, play with it. Get used to, you can't learn enough. So go in there and learn how that works. Go recreate a couple of tracks. That's the first thing I did in Symphoness is I recreated some Capcom tracks and learn how they did it, because you never know where your composing is going to take you, and eventually that might be a tool that you need in your tool bag.
And practice with limitations. Give yourself, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the limitations of the NES and the Game Boy, but limiting the amount of tools that you have available is a really good method of expanding your horizons with the tools that you have.
It can even be creatively freeing to not have so many options, because you can get decision paralysis. And so when you limit yourself and you're like, this is all I have to work with, what's the best thing I can make with this? You can get some really stunning results.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is all of our time for today. It's probably a few minutes early, but I think we got everything out that we wanted to talk about today.
That's great.
If you want to get in touch with us, our email is joystickjams@gmail.com. Joystickjams with a Z.
The Z.
We do have a YouTube channel, and we have a TikTok, but I don't know if we have anything on either of those yet. But
we'll soon.
Please, follow and subscribe, and we will have our VOD